This video is going to discuss some of the ways that the internet has changed the way that we consume information, the way that students learn, and then as a result, how we should be sort of structuring and organizing our information in order to, when we're teaching students information. Now, a lot of this information comes from some studies that have been done by the Nielsen Norman Group, who does a lot of great evidence-based research into how people consume information on the web. One thing that we know about the web is that people scan information on the web. So that, even in an online course, when we know that we need to know all of this information for a test or an assignment or something like that, a lot of students will scan the information first, and then they'll go back and read with a little bit more of an in-depth scan. Hardly anybody reads word for word anymore, even when we think that we're reading word for word. Often we don't, particularly on the web. So one of the things that we want to try and do to make sure that students are getting the most of the material and that they're reading the most amount of material is that we chunk information. So try not to be afraid of negative space. If you think of like a normal essay that a student might hand in, it's like sort of long paragraphs with constant text. It's not a great way to display information on the web. So don't be afraid of negative space. And one way of creating that negative space and creating some chunking is to list things or number things whenever possible. Keep paragraphs short, keep things concise, a good way to keep the reader moving along with your material. This idea of chunking is not new. It was introduced in 1956 by Harvard psychologist George Miller, and did some research about the fact that basically our working memory has a capacity of about 5 to 9 chunks of information. Some people in the 50s called the magical number 7, and some people have suggested that's a big reason why we have 7-digit phone numbers, because that's about all of the information that people can understand in a short amount of time with their short-term memories. So try and keep information short and chunk. People are more likely to retain that information. Also, as you're going through material, particularly in an online course, one of the things that you want to try and do is make sure that you're constantly transitioning between different topics and different points, sort of logically taking the reader through the course from one step and building and scaffolding on top of that previous knowledge. When you do that, when you create those associations between different things in people's minds, research has shown that we're going to help remember about 40% more of that information. So whenever you can connect the dots, it's a really good thing to do for our students. Also about writing for the web, we know to write in an inverted pyramid style is a very effective way to do that, where we put the most important information at the beginning, or the most newsworthy information at the beginning. So what is it that you really want students to take away? And you sort of start with the conclusion in that way, and then you add more further detail further down the page as you go. But traditionally on the web, you want to try and put the most important content or newsworthy content sort of closer to the top of the page. This is a great example from Nielsen Norman about the differences in types of text on the web, and these are 5 different examples of writing here. And you can see, like, almost unanimously, people don't like this type of paragraph and the type of language that's in this paragraph, promotional writing, and it's not very easy to read because it's just a paragraph, and people tend to like a lot more. You can see here the combined version of all of these different things that has a scannable style of reading. It's very concise, it's very objective. So here's some research suggesting that when you chunk information, when you put stuff in bullet lists and make it scannable and keep things concise, that it really is a lot more effective. Another thing that we're just going to quickly discuss is the use of visuals in education, and I thought that this graph was pretty interesting here. We tend to use visuals a lot for younger children, and the higher people go up in education, the less that we actually use visuals. So that's not a great thing. We should continue to use visuals. They're a great way to help people remember information, to create emotion. And on the web, a lot of informational material that you're going to come across on the web, and you'll know this from experience, has at least one purposeful image, and sometimes many more. The best types of images are real images. High quality, meaningful images, and if you're going to include an image, always make sure you caption it for the audience as well, because they may not know the context of why you're including this image, what's important to look for in the image. So you want to make sure that you do touch upon that stuff. And you can see, we want to try and use purposeful images, a meaningful image. If you're just going to put an image in for the sake of putting an image, nobody's going to look. And this is a great example from Amazon.com of people not looking at an image because it doesn't matter to them. Whereas Pottery Barn, when the picture is meaningful and purposeful, they're going to be studied a lot more intensely by people. And these are eye tracking surveys showing where they look. So people usually tend to, on the web, ask people to avoid stock or generic images because we tend to just ignore that type of image as just clutter. Our brain is really good at detecting that it's not really important information. However, sometimes those generic images or stock images are really good for things like icons and help with the chunking process to really create signposts in an online course. So for instance, like you have a discussion board, so you're going to include an icon to help indicate every time somebody sees that they can expect a discussion board. And also real pictures of real people are also very effective as well, as this study showed. So even though the text here takes up a lot more space than the images, people are paying attention to images because they like pictures of real people. So, and I think this is a good example too of why it might be a good idea to consider putting your picture up in an online course because people like to see that somebody's there. People like to see the real person. Another topic we're going to quickly talk about, plain language. Plain language is becoming very important in all public sectors. We don't have an official act here in Canada, but in 2010, President Barack Obama signed the Plain Writing Act. Not to be confused with something oversimplified or condescending, but really what we're trying to aim for is clear, simple, and easy to understand information. So clear and consistent is what we're going after. And here's an example of something that's not clear and concise and plain at all. Wouldn't it be much easier to just say something like this? Much clearer, much more concise. How about this one? Slower labor force growth may attenuate somewhat the problem of unemployment over the next decade. Yada, 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 yada. I don't even know what some of those words are. This is much better. With fewer younger workers entering the job market, unemployment may drop over the next decade. Keep things as simple as possible. The biggest place that we tend to add empty phrases is the beginning of sentences and paragraphs. We tend to preview what were the real important content with some filler. So that's a good way when you are going through your writing. Look for that type of stuff, particularly at the beginning of sentences and paragraphs, information that we're just sort of adding on that is not really that important. Always consider that less is more. You want to have good, rich content. You want to have a lot of information there, of course, but you always want to try and be as concise as possible. And that's part of that is the editing process, right? You want to get everything down initially, and then you go back through and edit it and challenge the words and get rid of unnecessary stuff. Another thing about writing on the web, try and use the conversational pronouns, you, us, we, I, those types of things. Try and make it personable and conversational as if you're just talking to a friend. This is a great example from one of our teachers here. Very personable, very friendly, very engaging. You probably all are like that in a face-to-face class. It's harder to do online. So just keep that in mind that people can't always get that sense of personality online. And a lot of research, some of this is based in research too as well, that learners are more engaged by direct first and second person language. So that when somebody feels like it's I and you and we're having this conversation, then they're going to be much more engaged. And try and motivate your students as well. This is another example of somebody who's, clearly recognized that motivation in learning is a big part of the learning process. And on a final note, one more thing that you can add to an online course which really helps is a sense of humor. Good way to lighten up a serious topic. Of course, you want to always be careful with humor. Not always appropriate, but I found, one teacher that we had was using humor very effectively in a math course. And you think math, traditionally, you think dry, boring. Perhaps for some people, those types of things. She used these images from the web to add a little bit of humor. So when we're talking about algebra, find something funny about that. If we're talking about geometry, find something funny. These are great strategies to try and engage students and really add that sense of personality to an online course, which is sometimes hard to do.